Back in 2020, my dear brother Mikey passed away, and I was devastated. He was 30 and he died of melanoma cancer. I remember when he was diagnosed, it was 2013, he was 27, and the entire family was in shock. It's not something that you expect, especially when you're so young. And being diagnosed with stage 4 meant that, well, we didn't have a lot of faith that this was going to be all okay. We all knew that something was going to change. And so we all went on this journey. I'm the oldest of 5. Mikey was the middle child. And all 7 of us and our extended family and friends began this journey that came with a lot of challenge and pain. And today I want to share a little bit about how I have processed and integrated Mikey's death in my life from my lens of perspective, and how my life has changed, not just in ways that have created resilience within me and grief in my experience, but also in very positive ways that have allowed me to have more peace in my life and more joy, which is very interesting. So a little bit more detail around what happened. He was 27 and he was about to go overseas. He was going to make a documentary in Africa, and he had a mole on his foot that he'd actually had checked out a few months prior, but the doctor had said, don't worry about it, it's nothing. And a nurse who was giving him some immunizations for traveling to Africa noticed the mole and said, maybe you should get that checked. And he did. And of course, it was a stage 4 diagnosis, which means essentially that the cancer has spread into the lymph nodes, glands of the body. And it was very difficult to return from that point, generally. Now, Mikey was always a very alternative thinker, and he had already embraced his quest to find wholeness in his life at such a young age. He'd been to Nepal, he'd been to India, and he'd been on these beautiful life treks to find himself. And even I wasn't at that point of maturation, if you like. I was very much heavily into escaping and staying numb. Yet he was demonstrating something that I would later understand more deeply. And so when he was diagnosed, he decided that wasn't going to be his fate, that he was not going to give himself to the medical system and live out his fate as was proposed by what he was being told. And for him, that meant that he was going to fully embrace the research required to find outside solutions to this problem that he was being given by life. So he began research into cancer, and he began to embrace some of these teachings and apply them in his own life. He reached out to many cancer survivors who had demonstrated alternative techniques that seemed to work for them, and he started to try everything. And he ended up dabbling in many different alternative treatments. He raised money and went to Germany, to Arcadia, which is a clinic that's known for many alternative treatments, cutting edge, new information, new science. And he managed to reduce his cancer in his body, which was a miracle. And the doctors said to him when he returned to his regular GP in Australia, whatever you're doing, Mikey, it's working, keep doing it. And so he was encouraged in his quest. And in this process, in this journey of finding health and wholeness again, he met many people and he started to form amazing community in this space of health. And as a result, he shared all of this information, knowledge, and education with the family, which began to, if you like, break some of our cognitive dissonance and pop some of our boundary bubbles about what was possible and help us to see outside of our realities that we formed and shaped because of our culture and programming. And this was wonderful, not just because we were learning practical health information that we could apply in our own lives to be healthier, but also because it started to challenge our thinking. And that's what often happens when you are given information that is outside your normal sphere of systems of belief. You are challenged to disprove maybe one part of that system, and that makes you ponder the idea that maybe there are other parts in my world that could be challenged too, and hence how we break the spell of cognitive dissonance. And Mikey was the way shower for our family and friends to begin to really open our minds to what is possible and to empower ourselves rather than give our power away to systems and ideologies. And so that was a wonderful side effect of this journey Mikey was on. However, generally speaking, there was great grief in the family. And from my observations, there was a focus on, we're going to beat this, we're going to beat this, we're going to fight this. And Mikey started to recognize that fighting something often creates a larger gap between finding solutions. It creates resistance. And it's such a beautiful lesson to learn. What we resist will persist. This was something that now I've realized in life is a general life approach that works not just in health, but in relationships, in wealth, in career. And realizing that we need to receive and accept whatever our experience is presenting at the time helps us to neutralize that, alchemize that, transmute that, so that we're no longer creating an enemy out there. When really our reality is a reflection of our inner world, as above, so below, as within, so without. And so this was another lessons that we were all exposed to around this quest that Mikey was on. Generally, when I think of my brother, Mikey, and many will remember him very fondly, he had quite an impact on his community. And his wake was filled with hundreds and hundreds of people. And it wasn't surprising. He was very warm. He was very playful. He had a spark in him. And he had a curiosity and sense of adventure, a fearlessness, a courage about him that was rare. It was definitely rare. And even now I can see that it's still a rare quality to not be drowned in the world of messages that we receive in our culture about working hard and creating a specific set of achievements. Mikey was outside those influences. And from the moment he left school, he got straight into something he loved to do, which was making films and creating amazing visual content. And he made a living out of that. He did quite well. He saved quite a lot of money. He was very good at it. He demonstrated something quite amazing to everyone, and that was to make a living out of something that fulfilled him. And I remember thinking, I've never known what that feels like, because personally, I left school and tried to fit my round peg in square holes for a couple of decades and led to a lot of exhaustion and misery. However, Mikey demonstrated a very different reality, and it was really inspiring to see. So it was a shock to the world when we found out that young Mikey, his life might be ending faster than we knew it. The doctors gave him a 20% chance of living past 5 years, which created a lot of grief within us well before he actually left the world. And for me, that was one of the hardest parts, is grieving someone who's with me. And I did that for 7 years until he actually left this world in 2020. It was very difficult not to realize every day that Mikey's life was probably going to be shorter. And it would always trigger a deep sadness within me. And at the time, I still had not recognized the importance of being conscious in my emotional expression. I pushed everything down. That's how I coped with life. That's how I did things. I was a thinker, not a feeler. And it was very foreign to me to be feeling. And so it was like this river of sorrow that came up that I did not know how to treat. I did not know how to nurture or hold that space for myself. But I knew that I needed to, because I'd spent my late teens and my 20s and my early 30s numbing myself with substances and addictions and escapism so that I didn't feel. But I knew at this point I'd already made a decision that I needed to feel. So this was a huge challenge. And I'm certain that everyone in my family and the community who knew Mikey also felt this deep sorrow. And how we all expressed sorrow is so different depending on our trauma and our conditioning. But to do it really fully self-aware and conscious is something I've learned to do. I hadn't mastered it at this time, but I certainly have a lot better grasp of how to express my pain with consciousness rather than pushing it all down and then reacting when I'm triggered. And so knowing that I still had a lot to learn, and I still do now, around relationships, when I found out that my brother was going to be facing this challenge, I wondered why he was diagnosed with cancer. Why did melanoma cancer come to his life? I've always been a questioner of things, and the why question can get us so in trouble. I love this beautiful teaching from Teal Swan. She teaches about asking how rather than why is often more empowering and gets us to solutions and insights faster. But I was asking, why Mikey? Why my brother? What did he do? How has he created this? There was a part of me that wanted to blame him and ask him, what did you do? Was it sunbed tanning? I know that he had been sunbaking and he believes that this didn't help, but before his high school formal, which is a prom in the US, before that, he had spent a couple of days sunbaking under a sunbed, which is now banned in Australia here. But he spent some time with those UV rays to get nice and tanned, to look good in his formal suit. And I remember him, after he was diagnosed with cancer, surmising that was probably one of the reasons that he got it. However, with my current perspective, and perhaps with contemplation over time and surrendering a lot of these whys, I've come to see that we all have the experience that we're given for a good reason. And it's not an accident, it's not random. And maybe that's what you believe, but I don't believe that. And I accept that we all have our own perceptions. My belief is that it's not random, but we have our challenges presented to us by life to learn. And It might seem tragic if we only believe that we have one life, but that's another thing that's really helped me to see a bigger picture, is I believe that we have more than one life. We are eternal, and energy cannot die, just changes form. Our soul lives on and we learn and grow. That certainly helped me a lot. And Mikey and I both had done neuro-linguistic programming training. We'd both done practitioner training under our same tutor, under our same mentor, Rob Whitewood. And I had come to see that indeed this is something that I still believe, that we create our reality through our thoughts, and we manifest everything in our external world from our world of thought. The universe is mental. It's a Hermetic principle. It's the first Hermetic principle. And when I work with my own clients, I very much need to find out, what is their world of perception? How do they perceive the world? And back then, I thought we have created our fate by our thoughts. And I believe that is true, but I also believe there's a nuance there. And it's our experience is a paradox. And so we have the soul's lessons that it wants to learn too. Yes, the avatar, the temporary avatar, the mind and the body create experiences as we are incarnated in this one lifetime. However, the soul is the everlasting aspect. So both are important. And yet I wanted to blame Mikey for thinking bad thoughts. What was he thinking that was so extreme? I was just frustrated and angry and trying to find answers where I was so confused. Why? I'm asking that question. Why us? Why our family? Why Mikey? So I had these assumptions that were, if you like, limiting. I didn't understand the nuances and I didn't want to accept them. Obviously, Mikey had his fair share of challenges. In 20s, diagnosed with a terminal illness. He had a beautiful girlfriend. He had a lifetime ahead of him, so he thought, of adventure. He was going to finish this documentary he was making in Africa. He was going to make a difference in the world. He was going to travel to faraway places and meet amazing cultures and learn how to be a good man, as I've heard him say many times. He was going to grow and transform and evolve and be the best version of himself. And he was going to inspire others. And this was very much Mikey. And I'm sure others will attest to this. Just being in his presence was wonderful. As I said, he was a very unique soul. So his challenges would have been vast. Coming to accept that he might die was probably the biggest challenge he had, because he put that off for a very long time and he fought. His fight was in him the whole time. He tried everything possible. He's poured his money and attention and efforts into fighting this and finding the cure. And this is where I was frustrated, because it was all about the physical treatment for his body. And I just thought, Mikey, where is your focus on your inner world and looking at your shadows and your blind spots and what may have created patterns of thought that have caused disharmony in the system? I just felt frustrated. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what I was experiencing. I felt sorrow and frustration like a roller coaster, and fear. And so I observed Mikey and his struggles and just felt so conflicted within, and I'm sure he was conflicted too. So my challenges were not trying to rescue. One of my old habits has always been to try and intervene and give advice. However, I also had a habit of being a victim. And if you've heard of the drama cycle, you'll be aware that there's the bully, the victim, and the rescuer in this cycle. And that's how we create drama. And my impulse was to feel sorry for myself too. Why do I have to feel so much sorrow, so much pain? Poor me. And it's not easy for me to share that. There's still shame within me for feeling like a victim. I perceived myself as being a victim, but I've never been a victim. And that's really one of the biggest things that changed my life for the good. And that little voice inside our heads that says, you're not good enough, or you've made mistakes or you should feel sorry for yourself, all very victim consciousness. And that's something that I've consciously changed. And it's making huge ripple effects in my life in so many ways. Peace, happiness, delight, joy, empowerment. Mikey, his coping mechanisms were to stay very busy and productive with fighting the cancer. And the middle part of the 7 years when he had this cancer diagnosis, he just focused on his life, like he was getting on with things. He met a new partner. He had a child. And throughout this whole time, the spot where they removed that mole was growing. And I remember seeing that lump around his ankle, and I said, Mikey, you should get that checked. And perhaps there was a knowing within him that, yeah, there's not much I can do. Perhaps there was a part of him that unconsciously knew that this was his fate and that there was no point fighting it. Because later on, it was the last thing he realized, acceptance. He had a child and he started a new life with this relationship and this child. And it was beautiful to witness. And he was very playful, like he always was with his son. They had a beautiful relationship. And I can tell you, his son today, it wasn't until this lump started growing to a significant size that Mikey realized this was serious. And if you've ever seen a tumor start to grow out of someone's body, it can be quite horrifying. And this tumor was quite aggressive. It started off small, but the biggest it got to was about this size. And if you can imagine that on one's ankle, that's pretty scary. And so before it got to that size, Mikey started a Gerson therapy, which is a very complicated, expensive treatment for healing cancer, involving 13 freshly cold-pressed juices a day and 5 coffee enemas and a whole plethora of alternative supplements. Now, that was a huge investment in his time, his money, and his resources. He admit that he wasn't going to be able to do this on his own. He moved back to my parents' house and he started to bring on board a whole lot of amazing heart-based volunteers from the community. And you can see how his community started to really grow at this point. People who wanted to give back, people who had overcome cancer themselves, people who just wanted to give and didn't get paid for this. He did hire a part-time helper to help him create some meals and pick all of the fruit and vegetables every week and wash them and prepare them. And it was a huge endeavor, huge. And he started to create a roster. And these volunteers from all walks of life and all ages, right up to 60s and 70s, down to teens, would come in and do these shifts. He called them his angels. And he got in an industrial cold press juicer. He got some serious equipment in there and he set up his studio. And that's where he focused for the longest time. I wanted to get in there and I wanted to talk to him. But the saddest part for me was accepting that he didn't want to go there. And in fact, because he had so many people moving in and out of each moment of his day, I started to step back from my closeness to him because I didn't see there was time. He was understandably frustrated. All of that imbalance was frustrating for him. And I could see him cracking. He was given medical marijuana sometimes for the pain that he was in and just seeing the relief. But there was no way I could intimately connect with him. I think there was a level of fear around being intimate and connecting with others, even though he was surrounded by others. And I recognize this in myself. This is something I'm working through now so that I can form genuine relationships and real intimacy with others so I can be vulnerable and real in front of others and not strong. And mask my real inner world. But Mikey was trying to survive, of course, totally understandable. And so I stepped back from the relationship with Mikey, as did we all, because we had to take turns and we had to just meet his needs and his requests, which was physical care. And he would just be quite demanding. I understand where he needed to feel that control. His coping mechanism was control at this point. And he created systems around him that felt like he was in control, because really the truth was he wasn't in control of this fate, of his reality, of what was happening in his body. And so he created these strict control measures, and it meant that there wasn't much room for intimacy or connection anymore in his life. And that devastated me. And I remember doing my rostered shifts and just making these juices and feeling so much tension and conflict inside. I just wanted to go over and hug him and cry with him, but that wasn't allowed. That was the sense. It wasn't allowed. And my coping was also to step back and to disconnect and experience my grief and trauma separate to him. And that makes me sad today thinking about it. I have processed a lot of this. It's been 4 years. Mikey passed away just before COVID started. He didn't know what COVID was, but the 4 years that I've taken to process the grief, I've come to wisdom through this process. And you've come to wisdom when you can talk about something without being completely triggered. And it's a lesson, it's a learning. And I look now back at Mikey and life, the years that I spent with him, with joy and with peace and a little smile inside. And yeah, I miss him sometimes, of course. I miss him a lot. I think of imagining him in the room with me and the joy and warmth and love that he would always bring. And that is so beautiful, and my heart sings when I think of that. I think just before he passed, he shared all of his learnings, and it was so beautiful. I could see his struggle, but just nearing those end days, he was having profound shifts in his perception. Oh, yeah, I could see that. And his energy was changing. There was acceptance finally. And it was peace. And it was beautiful. He wasn't fighting anymore. And he allowed himself to be with himself. And that's when he realized his worthiness. And he wrote a beautiful piece on recognizing he was worthy of love, that he'd spent his lifetime trying to earn love. But now he came to this realization and integration of the fact that he's worthy of love, and he didn't have to do anything to achieve that. And I think that he touched the lives of many in those last days when he was sharing his learnings and his integrations, his alchemization of this challenge, this pain. Just before he passed away, we had a vigil around his bedside in hospital in the palliative care ward. And he had tumors sticking out all around his body, his skull, his neck, his forehead. He had swelling. His skin had turned white. And his voice, he'd lost his voice just about. It was like a squeak for the last couple of months because he'd had a tumor grow in his throat. And that bedside vigil for me was excruciating. I was still in so much denial about feeling my feelings in front of others. I was ashamed of feeling feelings in front of others and being real about my feelings. I thought it was weak. It's how I'd been brought up. And so holding down all of the sadness within me as we knew that this was the last time we were going to see him felt like pressure inside my body was going to explode. And we said our goodbyes. We gave him a hug. And I remember walking out of that room. I was the last one to leave, looking back at him and looking in his eyes and seeing that the fear in his eyes. It was it. That image still haunts me, even though I know that he's okay now and he's free of all of that pain and he's free. It still hurts to remember that life slide. And it wasn't long after that he passed away. And I'm so glad I found out that one of his best friends, Kat Dawes, who exemplifies being in the present moment in her own teachings that she shares with others, held his hand and was with him in his last breaths and shared that he was in peace. And that was good to hear. My heart sung with that news. And just before he passed, I asked him to tell me when he was safe on the other side. I actually texted this at the time to him. And I didn't know what his response would be, but he replied, yes, of course, I'll tell you when I'm safe on the other side. And the morning that he passed, I was about to drive to Brisbane to teach. I was running employment programs and I was numb. My mum called me. I was just numb at the news. This might sound weird, but I felt relief because it had been 7 years of this pressure, 7 years of knowing that he was in pain and 7 years of grief. And when he passed, it just felt like a load off. I'm not saying that I wasn't devastated. I was still numb, but I felt that relief. Maybe there's a knowing within me that he was now free. He was free of the body and the pain, that the suffering that it was creating for him. But I felt relief and I decided, I didn't really feel much else. I decided to get in the car and go to work anyway. And the moment I turned on my radio, I was actually listening to a series of podcasts from Hay House, which are very uplifting, motivational podcasts. And the first podcast that came on was actually a song. And it only had one instrument, guitar, and two singers. And there's only one word in the song, and that was celebrate. And I knew immediately that it was a message for me because I'd been seeing my own therapist and she had been telling me to start to turn my lens around a little bit about how I see death. And not every culture sees death as something sad and horrible. Our Western culture looks at death and it's very taboo. We don't even want to think about death or admit that we're all going to die or even anticipate that there will be an ending. And she was trying to shift my focus to recognizing it's a celebration and that with every ending, there is a new beginning and to celebrate that. And she put that word in my head, celebrate that, Maurice. And listen to this song, the first thing that came on when I got in the car after hearing the news, and the only word in that song was celebrate. And it was beautiful. And I got full goosebumps and I felt this peace, this joy. I felt joy. I felt the joy you would feel in celebration. And then the next thing that came on was a testimonial from a woman called Anita Moljani, describing in great detail the time that she had stage 4 cancer. She was in hospital. She was on her deathbed. She was going through the throes of all of the symptoms that Mikey had just gone through. Everything I described before. And that she was ready to leave this earth. And she felt herself leaving her body, rising up, as we've heard these near-death experience stories before, rising up above the body, looking down, seeing the medical staff rushing around, seeing her family, hearing the news, seeing her brother on the plane to come see her before she passed, and realizing that she was just the essence of unconditional love. And that all of her pain that she'd been experiencing the last little while in the throes of cancer were gone, but she was free. She couldn't explain it in words how she felt, but she felt pure bliss. And long story short, in those moments listening to her testimonial, I realized that Mikey was speaking through her and telling me exactly what he had just gone through in the hospital an hour earlier, and how he was safe, he was free, he was liberated from the pain and suffering he'd gone through, and that I could celebrate. So my reaction in the car was weird. I didn't expect this, but I felt this, again, full goosebumps, but like this rush of energy through me, through my spine. I felt this laughing, crazy. I'm sure this is part of this is just relief and expression of that relief, but I just started laughing my head off with joy. Felt like he was in the car with me. The car felt electric, and I just felt amazing and happy for him, happy for everyone. So you can see that this has been an adventure, a journey, a very painful challenge for him, for me, for everyone that knew him, and the gifts that he has brought into my life because he went through that experience, I will be forever grateful for. One of them is I do not fear death. I see it as a new beginning, and I'm okay with that. I fully accept that. And when you don't fear death, you tend to not fear life the same way either. So you tend to take more risks. You tend to be more adventurous. You tend to be more curious, more energized. And I've noticed that in my life. My life has aligned more. I'm no longer uncertain about what fulfills me. I'm doing what I love for my career. I'm creating connections, relationships that I'm committed to, that are intimate and real and honest and vulnerable. And I'm working on these things every day to raise my awareness and to love more deeply, something that he always wanted to do. And so I hope this has been inspirational for you if you're struggling with grief or death or life. You know, Mikey still visits me a lot in my dreams. I have very vivid dreams where Mikey comes. I had this reoccurring dream theme with him over the last 4 years. It's like I get to see him again. I know he's going to pass, but I get to spend time with him. It's so surreal and wonderful to see him. It always feels like a reunion. And my current perception of this ordeal, if you like, this life experience, this hero's journey, is deep gratitude. I'm deeply grateful that I went through this. I don't regret it. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I know that might sound strange, but I don't think Mikey would either, with his higher perception of things now. And recognizing that there's always an equal amount of good going on in our lives while we're here. And we just need to fine-tune our lens to be able to view the truth of that. I hope this has been helpful. Much love to you on your hero's journeys. See ya.